1 o'clock, and we will begin. So hello everyone, welcome to this Learning Python from Scratch webinar. And today we will be continuing learning loops from yesterday's webinar. So if you're watching this live, do note that these webinars are on YouTube afterwards. And if you're watching this on YouTube, these webinars are live on Monday to Friday from 1 o'clock to 2-ish. That being said, if you want the link to the live webinar, they should be up on our Facebook page. It's the same link for every day. That being said, if you are watching this on YouTube, I do recommend joining live just so you could ask questions if you are stuck, if you have any questions. I do have the chat open. Let me just start sharing my screen. There we go. Okay. There we go, and we are sharing the screen. Cool. So yeah, I do have the chat up, so if anyone does have any questions, you could join in a live seminar or live webinar and ask any questions you may have. So yesterday we did go over arrays, or lists as they are in Python, but we're going to treat them as arrays. And we looked at for loops with them. At the end of yesterday's webinar, I did give you one of two challenges to do. You could have done both, that's perfectly fine. It's pretty much the exact same challenge, just worded a little bit differently. So I will be going through my answers to both of them. It's pretty much the same, so we'll take time on one and I'll just skim through the second one. Whichever we decide to do. I guess we will do this one. Where's the code? Here it is. There we go. We want the shell, and then we'll just put the image on top. There we go. So this is yesterday's challenge. So at the end of every major topic, I will try to give you a challenge, just so you could test yourself and see and just learn. The only way you're going to get better at programming is by practice. If you haven't seen any of our previous webinars, I do highly recommend you go watch them. They are on YouTube on our SB components page. Let me just quickly check the mic is set right. Yep, so you should be able to hear me. So yes, this was yesterday's challenge. Yesterday we looked at arrays and for loops and how to play around with both of them and how arrays work. And there were two challenges I gave. We're going to be going over this one first and then quickly the second one. It's pretty much the exact same thing with a few minor changes. So a quick overview of how this works. The essential idea is that the program asks for 5 different movies and in millions of pounds how much each movie made. It prints out the information at the end and gives you a total into how much the 5 movies made. So the challenge didn't specify that you had to use methods. I didn't. However, I did use comments to kind of annotate what I've done and how I did it. So it's good practice to always use comments, but it's not necessary that you have to use methods. I would only use methods in my code if either it's a large program or if the challenge specifies. It's fine if you did use a method, it's great practice, but just keep that in mind. So let's take a quick look into how I've done this. So yesterday, in yesterday's webinar, I did explain that this is how you are expected to do this. We have gone over records in Python, and probably using a record may have been easier for this alongside an array. However, I did say to do it this way just so you get more practice with arrays. So 2 arrays where a position in one array refers to information in the same position in a different array. So the 0th position here refers to the 0th position here, so on and so forth. If you haven't seen yesterday's lecture and aren't sure what I mean by 0th position or anything like that, do watch yesterday's webinar. Yeah, so let's get into exactly how this works. So I did say we are going to be using two arrays, and this program requires you to have the names and how much money or profit they made. So my array is called film names and film profit. Um, I also had a variable called total profit, which I just keep adding whatever the user enters, just so we have a total of all the values in profit. Over here, this is something which just comes naturally over time after programming. So over here, you could change this number, and then the rest of the code, it'll just change how many times um, you want it to run or how many movies you want. So if we change this to 10, the program will ask for 10 movies and hence 10 profit numbers. So since the program only wanted 5, I've set this to 5, so it'll ask 5 times. So this is kind of what this comment says. This is used to set how many films will be asked, and this is just where we create all our variables and arrays. So this is also fairly straightforward using a for loop in the way we're familiar, range X amount of times, X being number of films. This should be fairly straightforward, and this I kind of merged to ending whatever the film the user enters just immediately, because we don't really have to do anything else with it yet. However, we do create a variable called profit, store however much the movie made, and the reason we don't immediately put it into film profit is because we need to use it for the total profit, so I just created it as a separate variable. You could have still merged these two lines and then just refer to whatever the user entered for this. That's also perfectly fine. I just did it this way. Yet again, that's just the beauty of programming. Same thing could be done in multiple different ways. So that being said, I did store their profit in a variable and then added it to the array film profit and just added it to the total. If you don't understand what this means just take whatever this is and add it to whatever this is, plus equals. This is the exact same as total profit is equal to total profit plus profit. So this is just a short version of doing that. Now this last section is just where we print off this information. So it's just one single line here, which is this line here. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Which is this line here. And then it's a really simple for loop. So for in range number of films. So I just since we know we've asked 5 films, you could use the exact same thing here. So just do this 5 times, and each time print the whatever position you're on, print the corresponding position in this array, so the name, and in the other array, print the other its corresponding profit times 1 million, since they wanted it like that. And over here we said how much money did they make in millions of pounds. So we times it by 1 million. And then converted it to a string so we could print it. The final line to get these 5 films made however much money, that's also fairly straightforward. We know how many films we asked because that's up here. And we've been calculating the total profit all along. So let's quickly run this just to see if it works. And let's reopen this image. Which one is it? This one, there we go. Put that there. Names don't really matter, so let's just do A. But let's just use the same numbers, so just so we know it works. So A, B, 712, C, 666, D, 95, and A, B, C, D, E, 18. There we go. It printed out its corresponding names and its corresponding profits, which is the same as that. And it also printed out the correct figure for the total, which is all good to see. This could be made neater by having the space in between. The way you do that is just have an empty print statement wherever you want a space. I'm not too bothered about that. As long as you get the functionality down, you could sort out the way it looks later on. That being said, let's quickly go over the other version. which is this, and this is the challenge. So this is the exact same program. Essentially, the only difference is it's about music and how many thousands of times it was downloaded, and the way you print out the information is slightly different. But in this, you also have to track which music album or track had the most downloads. So just a little bit more complicated, but we'll quickly go through it. So essentially, this is a copy paste of the last program with this line here. So all this line does is, so actually let's go through it one by one. So total downloads is fairly straightforward. That's total profit from the last one. This last one we're just counting up all this. But this is new, most downloaded. So most downloaded we set to 0. Reason being is because this variable is going to store the position of the track that has the most downloads. Not the actual track, but its position. This has a few benefits, just so you know where exactly it is in your array. But yes, this is going to be storing the position, and that's very important to understand. This we were supposed to do 4, so not 45, 4. So we could do that there because we only wanted to run 4 times. As you can see, I literally copied pasted to make this one. I kind of forgot to change it from 5 to 4. That's fine. So this for loop is also mostly the same, just changed the strings that it asks so it matches this. That's the same, and of course we have this extra which sorts out which track has been downloaded the most. So essentially what this does, it gets the downloads whatever the user enters, and if it's greater than whatever is currently the most downloaded song, so it goes into the array and goes to the position which is the most downloaded song. If this download is greater than that, then just change most downloaded to the current position, of course, which is I. That's what we're kind of, I being which iteration you're on. So of course, if since we do number of songs here, this will run 0, 1, 2, 3, which works perfectly fine with arrays. Of course, watch yesterday's webinar if this doesn't really make sense. A little bit cleaner. This is also pretty straightforward. In the last one, we had this the other way around, so this is why there's more print statements here. Then we have the final for loop that prints out this information here. Now looking at it, there's not much more to talk about that, so let's just show it running. It is this one. So let's run it. So of course the names don't really matter. Let's just use the same numbers so we get the same total at the end. 2, 8, and 1. There we go. So 5,000, 2,000, 8,000. Of course, these are in thousands by timesing it by 1,000 where you want to print it, and then converting that to a string and then string manipulation. The total is the same, 4 tracks, 1,600, fairly straightforward. And hopefully this makes sense into how I did it. I could still play around with the print statements and how everything's printed, but for the most part, this seems pretty fine. Can't think of anything else to say about this, so if you do have any questions, do let me know. That being said, that's it for the challenges for now. This was just practice into using arrays and for loops. For loops being the first type of loops we looked at. Today we will be looking at the second type of loops, which are while loops. Now, the reason I taught for loops first, and the reason a lot of people teach for loops first, is because for loops are generally harder to understand, and if we were to teach while loops first, you'd always use while loops and never for loops, and that's just not a good habit to stay in. That being said, while loops can do everything for loops do and more. The the reason we use for loops is they tend to be, if you can use a for loop, they tend to be better efficiency-wise, and just overall makes your code a little bit cleaner. While loops can get fairly messy, and while loops could end up causing you to be stuck in an infinite loop. You're less likely to be stuck in an infinite loop in a for loop, but while loops can generate infinite loops, and yeah, sometimes that's what you want, sometimes it isn't. So just note that. Anything else? Oh yes. So the main difference between while loops and for loops is you use a for loop when you know exactly how many times you want to repeat something. You use a while loop when you don't know how many times you're going to want to repeat something. So that's how I explain the differences and when you should use which. So in today's challenges, at the end, when I do give you the challenges, you'll notice that you're waiting for a specific action from the user in order to break out your code or do whatever, which is a perfect example in the sense that you use while loops when you don't know how many times you're going to rerun the same chunk of code. That being said, let's get into how while loops look in Python. So while loops, of course, use the keyword while. It turns orange in Python, and for it's a habit of mine, I tend to use brackets just to contain the expression that we're going to use. Now, the best way to teach while loops is just grammatically understanding the word while. So each time I've taught while someone, I just ask them to use while in a sentence, and that's basically how it works in programming languages. So let's say you want to use while in a sentence. You could say, well, while I'm running, I listen to music. So while some condition is true, something's happening. That's the basic gist of while loop. So while something is true, or something's happening, or something is going on, do something else. So while I'm eating, I'll watch TV. So while I'm eating, something else is happening, which is watching TV. That's the way you understand while loops, and and it's fairly easy to use overall too in Python. So while some condition is true, so let's give it a condition. So while so generally with a while loop you need another variable. So let's say let's create a variable which is I is equal to 0. So while I is less than 10. So as long as I is less than 10, let's print out I, and let's do I don't know if plus plus works in Python. Let's test that. Run. Yep, so Python didn't like plus plus, so plus equals 1. Run. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. And there we go, print a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, I did less than and not less than and equal to. If I did less than and equal to, it would have printed 10 too. So that's the basic gist of while loop. So while this condition is true, keep doing this chunk of code. So obviously the first time you run it, it's 0, so it just prints that 0 and then it adds 1 to it. It checks again. 1 is still less than 10, do it again. At that point, it'll be 2, 2 is still less than 10, so on and so forth until it hits the condition, and this condition becomes false. So generally speaking, you will need a variable or something with while loops, so you keep checking it against some criteria, and until that criteria is met or not met, keep doing some chunk of code. So that's the basic gist. Just so we know, let me just show you over here. Let's just do print. I guess we could just print hi. Just in case. So of course, if you want your while loop to go on forever, you could just do while, if I spell true correctly, while true, keep doing this. And true, obviously, is always going to be true. So this is going to keep it stuck in an infinite loop. And if I run this, you're going to see an infinite number of highs. Now, as you can see, I'm going to quickly cancel that. So if you do ever get stuck in an infinite loop by accident, see we just printed out a lot of highs. If you do get stuck in an infinite loop by accident, just hit Control-C, and in the shell, hit Control-C which is a keyboard interrupt, which closes your program. That's just a little advice. With while loops, you're highly likely to eventually run into an infinite loop by accident that you create. And the best way to get out of them is just to press Control-C, which is a keyboard interrupt. I think Control-X closes Python. I'm not entirely sure, but there is another keyboard interrupt that you can use. But Control-C is the one I use. So if I ever get stuck in an infinite loop, just hit Control-C and you will close the program. That being said, if I do variable is equal to input name, you don't need to be in a loop in order to use Control-C, even if you run this. Let's say you're at this position in a program, you can press Control-C and it ends the program. So knowing that control, and this is the same for a lot of programming languages. So in Java, if you do press Control-C while running a program, you will close it. You would end the program and stop whatever you're doing. So that is Control-C, and if you do, if you do get stuck in an infinite loop, using Control-C is a very useful way of getting out of it. And then you could tweak your code and go back into testing it. That being said, while loops. So let's kind of go through an example of how we would use while loops. And after that, I will give you your challenge. So these two challenges, we'll be going through this one. The challenge I'll give you later is similar to this, but it has an extra piece of functionality which makes it slightly harder. So I'll be giving you that as a challenge, and I'll just go through this just so we could understand while loops, and I can show you how I kind of go about making one. So this is a fairly straightforward program. The program keeps asking how many late the train was, assuming you're at you work at some sort of train platform and you need to record this type of stuff. So it's a fairly straightforward program, a program that is used to count the number of times trains are late departing from a particular station. It should use a while loop keyword, repeatedly asking for the user to give a number of minutes late that the train that just departed was. It should stop asking when a negative number is entered. It should then give the number of trains that were on time, those that were no minutes late out of the total, and the number of minutes the worst train was late. For example, one running might be as follows. So let's say the first train was 2 minutes late, then 0 minutes, so that's on time, 13 minutes late, 1 minute late, on time, and then minus any negative number goes out the program, and it prints 3 out of the 6 trains were on time. So of course 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are 6 trains. 3 of them were on time. Of course that's the number of zeros. The worst train was 13 minutes late. So let's kind of mentally keep track of what information we have to store. Well, firstly we have to store how many trains in total we've kind of come across, which is fairly straightforward. We could have a variable that stores that. We also need to store the number that were on time, which is also straightforward. We could store that in a variable. This is just my mind process into how I go about making things like this. We also of course need a while loop, and for the while loop we need a variable. I'll get into how I'll create the variable in a second. And another thing we need to keep track of is how much the latest train was. So how late was the latest train, which also shouldn't be. We could also just store in a variable, and that would be that. Cool, let's get into it. So first off, right off the bat, I'm going to create my variables. Create variables for the program. Fairly straightforward. So as I said last time, we need a variable that takes track of total number of trains. So total trains, and we're going to set this to 0. We also need to keep track of trains on time. So trains on time. That's also going to be set to 0. And the last thing I said was latest train. Oh, that's probably what I'm going to call it. So latest train. So this is going to keep track of which train was which departed the latest. And I guess we could just set this to 0. Reason I'm kind of hesitant for now is normally with things like this, you either want it to be the first thing the user inputs or something like that. We can't really do that yet, so I guess it's safe to assume that the latest train was on time. And then if anything's bigger than it, we could set it to that. Anything else we need? Worst train, number of trains, trains that are on time. And that seems to be it. We also need one more variable that keeps that allows us to use a while loop. And I'm going to call this keep going. Keep going, and that's going to equal true. So keep going is just keep going until user enters a negative number. So that's just the variable I'm going to be using, and then of course it's a Boolean value, so technically it can keep going on forever until the user enters a negative number. So this is the main part of the code. I'm just going to use while loop to ask for train data. Fairly straightforward. It explains what the while loop is going to be doing. So while keep going is true, what we're going to be doing is we're going to ask for an input for the user, and we're just going to store it in time, I guess. So time is, this is fairly straightforward at this point. We're going to convert it to an int straight away. Input, and let's make it the same as the example. So how many min, am I spelling it? Yep, min at late was the train? Question mark. And that should be the same as the example. So we keep asking that. So the first thing we want to check if we need to exit the program. And I guess this is a good example to teach break. So if an if statement, so if time is less than 0, so if it's a negative number, what we want to do is we want to break. Break is, so I guess this is one way of doing it, and we want to say keep going to false. So what this does is break basically tells it that the loop you're in, break out of it. So break is a really useful keyword. So if you're within a loop and at whatever point within the loop you want to exit the loop immediately, you use a keyword break, which basically just means the loop, the first loop so if this while loop was inside another loop, it wouldn't affect that, it would just affect this while loop here. And you'll break out of it in that regard. Now, the reason I set it to false is just, so this break, technically I could just have break here and it'll work just the exact same without having this line, but it's just good practice to, since we want to stop, just set this to false. Yeah. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Break. So that's the first condition. If it's not less than 0, we need to kind of process it. So if, I guess we could do elif. So elif, of course elif, if you don't know what elif does, I do think it's our 4th webinar. We go through if statements and how else if works. So else if time is equal to 0, what we want to do is add 1 to both total trains and trains on time. But since we're going to be, after this point, since we're going to be adding 1 to trains, total trains regardless, we'll put that line at the end. And I'll explain in a sec what that means. But for now, we're just going to do trains on time plus equals 1. So trains on time plus equals 1. That's what we're going to do, and else what we're going to do is we're going to check if it's the latest train, because of course this otherwise if it's not less than 0 or if it's not equal to 0, that means the train was late. So in this regard, what we're going to do is, first things first, we're going to check if it's the slowest or the latest train that's departed today. So if latest, we need another if statement, so this is going to be an embedded if statement. So if latest train is less than time that we just got, what we want to do is latest train is equal to time. So set that to be the latest, and over here we're just going to do total trains plus equals 1. Now the reason I haven't put this inside of this else and this elif is because both of them are going to be doing it, so we could just leave it outside since both of them are going to be doing it. So it just saves up repeating the same line. And that's also the reason that we have break here, is because if we want to exit, we don't want to accidentally add 1 to trains. So if we break immediately at this point, that just means we won't run anything after your if statements. What else do we want? I guess at this point we just want to print out the information to the user. So over here we're going to say when user exits, print info. That's what's going to happen here. So straightforward print statements. First one is number that were on time out of total number trains were on time. So first things first, it's going to be trains on time. We're going to be converting these to strings. It's slightly longer, but it's easier to play around with strings. So trains on time plus out of, we want spaces just so it looks good, out of trains on time out of some amount of trains, which is total trains, so str, let's turn that to don't want capital, total trains. So total trains, trains on time out of total trains. Trains were on time at this point, so plus trains were on time. Cool. So that prints out that first line. Since this has a space here, we could also just print a blank line, which will create that space. And then we need to print out what the worst train was. So print the worst train was space plus str, since this is all going to be strings. Latest train plus, and then let's finish off the sentence. Minutes late. And now let's test if this works. So let's run it. Okay. Okay, how many? So let's do this example just to see if it works. Let's pull that up here. Cool. So the first train was 2 minutes late, then 0 minutes, then 0 minutes, and 13, then 1, then 0, then -1. Of course, -1 is just dash and then a 1. Python understands that's a minus. There we go. 3 out of 6 trains. We forgot a space there. So let's add a space back. Of course, it just doesn't look right. More on time. The worst train was 13 minutes late because, of course, that's what we entered. Let's play around with it a little bit more, though. So let's see if we could break it. Of course, the easiest way to breaking it is by typing in random words. Bang, broke it. We're going to ignore that for now. That's the main way you could break the programs we'll create, because we're not too interested in validating just yet. We're more into just understanding the basics and getting it right. So let's just see what happens when you type in a negative number right off the bat. So let's just make sure that -10 does print out what it's supposed to. And let's see what that does. So 0 out of 0 trains were on time. The worst train was 0 minutes late. So that's pretty standard. It just prints out what the default were. Cool. That's good to know that that works. Let's do a similar, but instead of -1 here, let's do like -10 or -20, another negative number. So 2, 0, 0, 13, 1, 0, and let's do minus, so I got 456. Yep, that still works. So any negative number will close the app or the program. I can't think of anything else to discuss about this. There's no messages in chat, and we are definitely recording. Cool. So yeah, that's a basic understanding of while loops. So while loops just needs a variable to kind of play around with, or a statement. So while loops can do everything that for loops can. So while, like the first example I showed you, you have like the first example I showed you was I is equal to 0, and while, whoops, while I is less than 10. Can I not type? Oh, print I. So this is the exact same. This, let's actually put in comment. Actually, let's do it within this. This is the exact same as doing for I in range 10. This loop is the exact same as, well, these two lines. So of course this for loop combine these two lines into one, and it's slightly more efficient. Do you know that if you change I within the for loop while loop itself, it will change it. It will change the value of I, and then when you do the comparison, it will be using the previous value of I. 2 webinars ago, I think last week's Friday's webinar, we did look at that if you change I within a for loop, it doesn't affect the actual for loop from running. So do keep that in mind. That is something you can run into. That being said, while loops are generally easier to understand and easier to use, but do use for loops for practice, and of course its main function being to run a specific number of times that you know. Of course, we don't know how many times a user is going to enter a train here. User could enter 200 trains, 5 trains, 1 train, 0 trains. So with a while loop, you don't know how many times it can be running it. Hence, we use while. So while this condition's met, keep doing something. But on the other hand, for for loops, you know exactly how many times you want to do it. You want to do it X amount of times, so you use a for loop. For loops are also better to use to go through arrays. While loops, while you can use it for while loops, it gets a little bit messy. That being said, I can't think of anything else on the top of my head or in my notes to go over while loops. Break was the main thing. Another way you could technically have done it is get rid of the break and just have total trains within the elif and else, and it will run the exact same. By setting this to false, you just skip over all of this, and since this is false, it won't run anymore. Actually, let's do that. So let's get rid of this. Let's put it where it needs to be within here, like that. And let's get rid of the break just to show that this will run the same. Run, okay. There we go. So how many minutes late was the first train? Let's do the exact example on top. 0, 0, 13, 1, 0, minus 2, let's just say. There we go. 3 out of 6 trains were on time. The last train was 30 minutes late. So it works the exact same way. It just, of course, the way if statements works is once we enter this, we ignore the rest of it, and there's nothing else to do. Hence, it checks this condition again, and since it's false, it goes on does the rest of the code. So hopefully that has made sense today. If you do have any questions, do come to the live webinar. If you are watching on YouTube, do come to the live webinar, 1 o'clock UK time, Monday to Friday. And feel free to ask then. Today's challenge is slightly more difficult than this train program, and it's a bus program. So fairly similar, but in this program you have to specify what the bus is, how many minutes late the bus was, and you have to, at the end, in this program, if you type which bus passed is 0, you need to break out immediately. Tell her how many buses passed. In this case, it was 1, 2, 3, 4. And which one was the most delayed and what route. So in this case, it was 7 minutes late, and it was on Route 22. So it's just a little bit more complicated. Be sure to make comments, just good practice. You can use a hint if you want. You could do this however you want. A really impressive way would be using arrays alongside with it. So you store all the buses that pass, and at the end check which one was the latest. But that's just an extra bonus challenge. I don't recommend you do it like that. I mean, you don't have to do it like that, but it will be more difficult to do it like this. If you want a extra challenge, you could try using arrays and doing it that way. Tomorrow's webinar, I do have in my notes somewhere what it's going to be. If you hold on 1 second. In tomorrow's webinar, we are going to be doing abstract data types. So we're going to be building up on records and actually make them into abstract data types, and understanding that. And after that point, we will be starting to make a little bit more complicated programs, all in procedural for now. Object-oriented programming will be in a week or so. We'll start looking at object-oriented programming in Python in about a week. Yeah, so thank you everyone so much for watching. Please do pause the video here or take a screenshot of this challenge, give it a go, and I will have my answer in tomorrow's webinar. So thank you everyone for watching. I don't see any questions in chat, so thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will see you in tomorrow's webinar. Bye-bye.